All right, let's dive into this week's deep dive.
Sounds good.
We're going to be tackling something
Okay.
pretty interesting, I
All
think,
right.
and that is this whole idea of a generational divide
Yeah.
in Australia.
Right.
And we've got a stack of news articles here covering just about everything,
Oh, wow.
from immigration and political donations to workplace reforms, and even a billionaire's barbecue fundraiser.
Interesting.
So we'll see how all these
Yeah.
seemingly separate stories
Right.
actually tie back to this growing rift between younger, middle-aged, and older Aussies.
Yeah, it is a complex issue, that's for
Yeah.
sure. And it really does have far-reaching implications.
Yeah.
It's not just
Yeah.
about economics or even politics.
Right.
It's about different values, different priorities, and different visions for what the future of the country should be.
Absolutely. And it feels like this week's news really highlights those differences.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So let's start with a story that touches on both immigration and this sense of generational disconnect. The government's decision to resettle 3 non-citizens from Nauru.
Okay.
They were part of a group known as the NZYQ cohort.
Right.
You know, folks who's been in legal limbo for years,
Yeah.
unable to stay in Australia, but also unable to be sent back to their home countries.
Yeah. And what's really interesting here is that this resettlement, while it is a small step,
Yeah.
is being seen as kind of a test case.
Right.
It follows that high court ruling that we all remember
Yep.
that deemed indefinite detention unlawful.
Mm-hmm.
And the Home Affairs Minister, Tony Burke, has even suggested this could pave the way for more resettlements down the line.
Interesting.
But as you can imagine,
Yeah,
it sparked a lot of debate,
of course.
particularly around the public safety angle.
Yeah, the opposition's been pretty vocal about that.
Right.
They're arguing that this move could put Australians at risk.
Yeah,
They're concerned about...
I can see their point.
Yeah,
I mean,
the potential.
they're concerned about the potential for these individuals to reoffend once they're resettled.
Right.
Right.
And it kind of seems like a classic example of how different generations might view the same issue
Yeah.
through completely different lenses, right?
Okay.
Like maybe younger Australians who statistically are more likely to lean toward those progressive policies
Yeah.
might see this as a humanitarian issue first and foremost.
Exactly.
Whereas older Australians might really prioritize those security concerns.
It is a great observation.
Yeah.
It really is.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
It is. And this tension that you're talking about
Mm-hmm.
between compassion and security,
Yeah,
it plays out in so many areas of Australian politics.
for sure.
Take the debate over political donations, for example.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I mean, this week we saw a bipartisan agreement on capping donations and increasing transparency.
Right, on the surface, these reforms,
Mm-hmm.
you know, capping donations to independents at $50,000
Yeah.
and to major parties at $450,000 through their branches seem like a step in the right direction.
You would think.
And lowering that disclosure threshold
Right.
should, in theory,
Yeah,
make things more transparent.
for sure.
But it's interesting to see how some independent MPs,
Yes.
particularly those who appeal to a younger, more idealistic voter base,
Yeah.
are pushing back against these reforms.
Well, yeah, and their argument is that
Mm-hmm.
these caps actually favor the established parties.
Right,
Someone like Zali Steggall, for example,
right.
has pointed out that while the intention
Yeah.
might be to limit the influence of big money in politics,
Sure.
the reality is that
Yeah.
these caps could actually make it harder for challengers
Right.
to compete against the major parties who already have those established
Right.
fundraising networks.
So it almost makes you wonder, are these reforms just window dressing?
Well, that's the billion-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, how much of an impact can donation caps really have when you've got billionaires hosting these lavish fundraisers?
Well, that's a perfect point, because this week's news provided a really good
I was
illustration
going to say.
of that very point.
Yeah,
Peter Dutton, the opposition leader, held a fundraiser in Brisbane,
right.
hosted by beef industry giants Trevor Lee and Kerry Craigley.
Of course, of course.
And the event reportedly raised over $320,000 for the Liberal Party.
Wow.
Talk about a high-stakes barbecue.
That's something else.
I love a good sausage sizzle as much as the next Aussie.
Oh, yeah, me too.
But that's a whole other level.
It certainly highlights the potential for loopholes
Yeah,
and this enduring influence
right.
of wealth in politics.
Absolutely.
And it speaks to that cynicism that many, especially younger Australians, feel towards the political system.
Yeah,
They see these big money events,
right.
and they just wonder
Mm-hmm.
if any amount of reform can truly level the playing field.
Yeah, it's like a slap in the face to the idea that everyone has an equal voice.
Yeah.
It feels into that sense of disillusionment that I talked about earlier.
For sure.
Okay, let's switch gears for a second
Okay.
before I get too deep into that.
Right.
Let's go to another issue that's causing a stir.
Mm-hmm.
The ongoing battle over workplace reforms.
Right.
The Business Council of Australia
Yeah.
and the Minerals Council of Australia, MCA,
Yep.
are not mincing words
I've heard.
in their criticism of the Albanese government's approach to
Yeah.
all this.
Okay.
They've been particularly vocal about the multi-employer bargaining component of the reforms.
Right. And for those who aren't familiar with that,
Yeah.
multi-employer bargaining allows workers from different companies within the same industry
Okay.
to negotiate their wages and conditions collectively.
Oh, right.
So you can see why
Yeah.
the BCA and the MCA
Right.
would be a little concerned about that.
Yeah, they argue that it'll give unions too much power
Right.
and stifle business flexibility.
Yeah.
They're calling the government's review of these reforms a charade,
Oh, wow.
even economically dangerous.
Strong words.
But the government, particularly Workplace Relations Minister Murray Watt,
Right.
is pushing back,
Okay.
saying these reforms are about creating a fair system for workers,
Mm.
boosting wages, closing that gender pay gap.
Okay.
So who's right?
Mm-hmm.
And more importantly, how does this impact everyday Aussies?
Well, it's complex.
Yeah.
There are valid arguments on
Sure.
both sides.
Okay.
The BCA and the MCA,
Mm-hmm.
they're concerned that multi-employer bargaining could lead to a one-size-fits-all approach
Okay.
to wage negotiations,
Mm-hmm.
which could hurt businesses
Right.
in certain sectors or
Right.
regions.
Right.
They fear it could lead to job losses and reduced investment.
Sure. Yeah.
On the other hand,
Yeah.
the government's arguing that these reforms are essential to address wage stagnation
Right.
and to ensure that workers have a stronger voice in negotiations.
Right? So it really boils down to a fundamental difference in perspective.
Exactly. And this brings us right back to
That.
the generational divide.
Yep. Full circle.
Younger Australians, who are statistically more likely to be in casual or insecure work,
Yeah.
might be more supportive of reforms that strengthen workers' rights and boost wages.
Makes sense.
Older Australians, who may have benefited from a more deregulated labor market,
Right.
might be more skeptical of these changes.
It's just fascinating how all these seemingly disparate issues all connect back to this
I know.
underlying tension
Yeah.
between the generations.
It really is like we're witnessing a clash of values,
Yeah.
a struggle to define what kind of Australia
Yeah.
we want to be.
Yeah. Who are we?
Exactly. And how do we
Yeah.
want to move forward as a nation?
What does the future hold?
Big questions.
Big questions.
Big questions.
All right. Well, we'll keep unpacking this and
Let's do it.
see where it leads.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost as if we're having two separate conversations, one about economic policy,
Right.
the other about social values.
Yeah.
And those two conversations
Right.
rarely seem to intersect.
It's like we're speaking different languages.
It is.
And that just makes it incredibly difficult
Right.
for any political leader to really craft a message
Right.
that resonates
Mhm.
across generations.
Mhm.
How do you appeal to a young person struggling to make rent while also addressing the concerns of an older generation worried about their retirement saving?
Exactly. And it raises the question,
Yeah.
are the major parties even equipped to deal with this level of complexity?
Well, their track record hasn't been great lately.
No, it hasn't.
We've seen so much partisan bickering and short-term thinking that it's hard to imagine them tackling these really systemic issues head on.
And it kind of makes you wonder
Yeah.
if the political system itself is part of the problem.
It does feel that way sometimes.
Yeah.
If it incentivizes division rather than collaboration,
Right. We
Yeah.
need the next election.
seems to take priority
It does.
over solving long-term challenges.
And that brings us back to this
Yeah.
whole generational divide.
Mm-hmm.
If young people are becoming increasingly disillusioned with the major parties,
Right.
where does that leave them?
Well, we've seen a surge in support for the Greens,
We have.
especially among those younger voters.
That's right.
They seem to be tapping into this desire for real change,
Mm-hmm.
a move away from the status quo.
But can the Greens actually deliver on their promises?
Right.
I mean, they've been criticized for being idealistic and lacking the experience to govern effectively.
That's a valid concern.
It is.
And even if they do gain more power, can they really bridge this generational gap? Or will they eventually become just another part of the political establishment that young people will eventually reject?
Well, it's a fascinating dilemma.
It is.
And it really does reflect this broader trend that we're seeing globally,
Mm-hmm.
this growing distrust of traditional institutions,
Right.
and a real search for alternative forms of political representation.
Yeah, it feels like this
I
yearning
agree.
for something different,
Yeah.
a system that's more responsive to the needs of ordinary people.
Mm-hmm.
But what does that system look like? And
Yeah.
how do we get there?
Those are the big questions
Yeah,
that
huge.
Australia and really many countries around the world
Mm-hmm.
are grappling with right now.
Absolutely.
It's crucial that we find a way to navigate this new landscape,
Yeah,
ignoring the generational divide
right.
or dismissing it as simply a matter of differing opinions.
Mm-hmm.
That won't work.
Yeah.
We need a deeper understanding of what's driving these divisions
Yeah.
and a willingness to engage in open and honest dialogues.
Okay, so let's kind of recap here. So we've
Perfect.
covered a lot of ground:
We have.
immigration, political donations, industrial relations,
Yeah,
and this overarching theme of the generational divide.
it all ties
So
together.
what does it all mean for the future of Australian politics?
Well, one thing's for sure,
What's that?
it's going to be a bumpy ride.
I believe that.
Australia is facing these multiple interconnected challenges.
Right.
Economic anxieties are running high.
Yeah. Across all age groups?
Political maneuvering and campaign finance issues are eroding trust in the system.
Mm-hmm.
And this generational rift
Yeah.
is creating a real sense of fragmentation within Australian society.
It is. And all of this is
Right.
happening against the backdrop of an increasingly uncertain and volatile global landscape.
Oh, absolutely.
It really feels like we're at a crossroads,
It does.
a moment where things could go in very different directions.
Exactly. And it begs the question,
Yeah,
can either of the major parties rise to the occasion?
that's the question.
Can they offer a vision of the future that's compelling enough to bridge these divides and restore public trust?
Or will this upcoming federal election just further entrench these divisions and lead to even more disillusionment with the political system?
It's a crucial moment for Australian democracy.
It really is.
The stakes are high,
Yeah.
and the choices that are made in the coming months will have a profound impact on the country's future.
Without a doubt.
This next election may very well determine whether Australia can move forward as a united nation or fall deeper into division and distrust.
It's easy to get caught up in all the negativity, all
Right.
this talk of division and disillusionment.
I understand.
But there's also a sense of possibility here.
Oh, tell me more. I'm intrigued.
Well, maybe this generational divide, this dissatisfaction with the status quo, is actually a catalyst for something positive.
Okay.
Could this be a time for new ideas,
Yeah.
fresh perspectives?
I like the way you're thinking.
Yeah.
Perhaps this is an opportunity for a new kind of leadership to emerge,
Mm-hmm.
one that's more collaborative,
Okay.
more inclusive,
Yeah.
and more focused on the long-term well-being of the country.
Right. A leadership that can really bridge the gap between the anxieties of the past and the aspirations of the future.
Exactly.
Imagine a leadership that's not afraid to tackle tough issues,
Right.
to have those uncomfortable conversations,
Yeah.
and to build bridges across generations.
Mm-hmm.
A leadership that sees this generational divide not as a threat, but as an opportunity to build a stronger, more resilient, and more vibrant Australia.
That's a powerful vision,
It is,
but it's going to take more than just words.
of course.
It's going to require a fundamental shift in how we approach politics and how we engage with each other.
Absolutely. And one of the keys to that shift is understanding
Right.
the deeper anxieties and aspirations that
Mhm.
are driving this generational divide.
You're right. We've talked about it in broad strokes, but I think it's worth taking a closer look at what each generation is struggling with
Okay.
and what they're hoping for.
Yeah, let's dive into that study we mentioned earlier.
Okay.
The one that really unpacks the different anxieties and aspirations of each generation in Australia.
That's a great place to start,
Yeah,
because if we can understand where each generation is coming from,
right.
we can start to build those bridges of empathy and understanding
Mm-hmm.
that are so crucial to a more unified
Yeah.
and prosperous future.
Okay, so let's unpack this study a bit.
Okay.
And see what it reveals about the anxieties and aspirations that are shaping each generation in Australia.
It's fascinating how the study goes beyond just the economic indicators.
Right.
It dives into the psychology of each generation,
So,
exploring their values, their fears,
mm-hmm.
and their hopes for the future.
Okay, so paint me a picture.
Okay.
What are some of the key takeaways
Okay.
for each generation?
Well, let's start with the youngest cohort.
Okay.
Those aged 18 to 28.
Mm-hmm.
They're really facing a world that
Yeah.
feels
Mm-hmm.
increasingly precarious.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
they're burdened with student debt,
Yeah.
struggling to find affordable housing,
Huge issue.
and entering a job market that's vastly different
Yeah.
from the one their parents experienced.
Totally.
Climate change is a major source of anxiety for them.
Understandably.
And they're really looking for leaders
Yeah.
who take it seriously.
Makes sense. It's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
they're inheriting a world riddled with problems that previous generations just haven't adequately addressed.
And it's not just about
Right.
those material concerns.
Right.
This generation also has a different set of values.
Okay, how so?
Well, they're more focused on social justice,
Okay.
environmental sustainability,
Mm-hmm.
and work-life balance.
Interesting.
They're less likely to define success purely in terms of material wealth
Okay.
or career advancement.
So it's not just that they're struggling economically, it's that they're
No,
also questioning the very definition
they are.
of success that previous generations embraced.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now, if we shift our
All
focus
right.
to that middle-aged group,
Okay.
those between 40 and 55,
Mm-hmm.
we see a different set of anxieties emerge.
Okay, such as?
Well, they're the ones who've
Yeah.
generally played by the rules,
Right.
worked hard,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
achieved a certain level
Yeah.
of material success. But
Right.
for many of them,
Mm-hmm.
that success has come at a cost.
Okay.
They're feeling squeezed by rising living costs, stagnant wages,
Yeah.
and a sense that that social contract
Mm-hmm.
that they grew up with is fraying at the edges.
Right. And they're often referred to as the sandwich generation.
Yes,
Because they're caught
that's
between
exactly
caring for aging parents
right.
and supporting their children.
Who are facing their own set of challenges.
That's a lot of pressure
It is.
on those folks.
It leads to a sense of being stuck,
Yeah.
even if they've achieved those traditional markers of success,
Right.
a house, a car,
Yeah, the Aussie dream.
a stable job.
Right.
They're worried about their children's future
Mm-hmm.
and whether their kids will have the same opportunities that they did.
It's like if they're realizing that the Australian dream that they were promised
Right.
isn't quite what they expected.
Yeah. And then we have
Well, like-
the oldest generation,
All right.
those over 75.
Okay.
They've witnessed incredible changes over their lifetime.
They really have.
They've generally benefited
Yeah.
from decades of economic growth and rising property values.
For sure.
But
Yeah.
they're not immune to anxieties I have.
Of course not. No one is.
Right.
What are some of their concerns?
Well, they're facing their own set of challenges related to health,
Okay.
financial security,
Mm-hmm.
and the increasing cost of aged care.
Yeah. Big issue.
They're also worried about the world they're leaving behind for their
Right.
grandchildren.
Yeah.
They see the climate crisis,
Mm-hmm.
the political polarization,
Yeah.
the economic inequality,
Right.
and they wonder if future generations
Yeah.
will have the same quality of life that
Right.
they enjoyed.
It's interesting how, despite their relative affluence, they still share this sense of anxiety about the future.
Well, it highlights the fact that these generational anxieties
Right.
are about more than just money or material possessions.
Okay.
They're about a sense of belonging,
Mm-hmm.
a feeling of security,
Yeah.
and a belief that the future holds promise.
Yeah.
And right now,
Mm-hmm.
many Australians, regardless of their age,
Right.
are feeling a lack of those things.
So we've got these three generations,
We do.
each grappling with its own set of challenges and anxieties.
Mhm.
But what does this mean for Australian society as a whole? Where do
Mhm.
we go from here?
This generational divide isn't just a political issue.
Right.
It's a societal issue.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
if we don't find a way to bridge this gap
Right.
to understand and address each other's anxieties,
Yeah.
we risk creating a society that's increasingly fractured and polarized.
It's a scary thought.
It is.
So we need to find those points of connection.
We do.
Those shared values that can unite us despite our differences.
Absolutely. And that starts with empathy,
Okay.
with a willingness to listen to each other's stories
Mm-hmm.
and to understand where each generation is coming from.
Right. It's about recognizing
It is.
that we're all in this together.
Yeah.
That our fates are intertwined.
We need to shift away from this zero-sum mentality,
Mhm.
this idea that one generation's gain
Yeah.
is another generation's loss.
Right. We need to move towards a more
Yeah.
collaborative approach, one that recognizes that a society that works for everyone,
Mhm.
young and old,
Right.
is ultimately a society that works better for all of us.
Well said.
Yeah.
Well said.
It's a powerful reminder
Yeah,
that
it's-
despite the challenges we've explored in this deep dive,
Right.
there's also hope.
There is.
Hope that we can find common ground, bridge this generational divide, and build a future that's brighter and more equitable for all Australians.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
It's going to take effort. It's going to take courage. And it's going to take a willingness to step outside our own generational bubbles and engage with each other in a spirit of understanding and respect.
Yeah.
But I believe it's possible.
And on that note of cautious optimism, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into this complex world of Australian politics and the generational divide that's shaping its future.
It has been a fascinating conversation.
It really has.
One that I hope has challenged our assumptions and sparked some new ideas about how we can move forward as a nation.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
It was my pleasure.
We hope you've gained some valuable insights into the forces shaping Australia today.
Mm-hmm.
Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep engaging in those crucial conversations that will help us build a better future together.
Couldn't have said it better myself.